Friends, welcome back to Cultural Savage. It's good to see you again. This week, I am interviewing Jenna DeWitt. She is an aromantic, asexual Methodist. She spent a decade writing and editing in Christian media, and now edits a wide variety of publications, from websites to books to articles to curriculum. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Journalism from Baylor University. She's originally from the border of eastern New Mexico and the West Texas Panhandle, but now she lives in sunny Southern California. You can read her blog, Invisible Cake Society, and find her on Twitter at Jenna DeWitt, or Jenna_DeWitt. There we go. For more on queer advocacy within the church, singleness, mental health, and pop culture. Jenna, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
Doing well, Aaron. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing okay. It's a decent day so far. Had the day off work, so nice and rested up. You know how it goes.
Sure.
Well, Jenna, you are a new friend of mine. We've met over Twitter recently. I would love to hear some of your story, kind of what brought you to where you are, where you are, just a little bit about you and, your story.
Sure. Well, like I said, I was raised in a really small town. So you might hear a little Texas accent come out here and then, generations back. Then I went to school at Baylor University, which was, I knew it was a little more conservative than I was because I'd grown up in a very affirming tradition of women as leaders and very egalitarian, very feminist. Like, someone gave me a sticker growing up that was like, girls can do anything boys can do. And I was like, is this a popular saying? Like, I didn't really understand, because of course they could. Like, my mom is a doctor. Right. Like, I was surrounded by very powerful women, multicultural, powerful women in an Air Force town. So I grew up in a pretty conservative part of the country, but then also like a surprisingly progressive framework for that. And so I went to Baylor, and it was more conservative than I was, so I thought that's what conservative Christianity was. That is not at all accurate. Baylor is actually fairly liberal on the scale of Christian colleges. Yeah. Baylor is pretty far out there to the left. So I thought that was it. Like, I thought I knew what Christian conservatism was. I, went to a Methodist church for a while, got involved in a small group at a more charismatic megachurch. And so I was vastly unprepared for that. I did like the scripture says to test and approve everything, and like the Bereans did. And so I'm going throughout this process, I can understand where they're coming from, or even things like they were a little more complementarian than I was, or more Baptist. Right, I was like, I understand why that fits into their tradition, even if it's not where I stand. And so I was able to kind of have that syncretism of coming into it with more Wesleyan beliefs, more Methodist beliefs, more feminist beliefs, but being in a more conservative church. So I thought that I was keeping a pretty good balance there. I really wasn't. Then I was really sucked into this very toxic vending machine God kind of spirituality of like, if you just pray for it, God's going to give you anything you need. And so therefore, on the flip side, if you are failing at something, like if God's not coming through for you, if he's not healing you, if you don't have all the desires of your heart, like it's because you are failing. Like, God doesn't change. Therefore, if you don't feel God in your life, who moved? And so it's very shaming. So then after that, I graduated from Baylor, and a lot of that theology kind of fell apart. When you're no longer in the community that perpetuates that kind of belief, then things kind of, you get real tested about what's real and what's not. So I lived in Alabama for about 4 years, which was, again, a very conservative environment. And I wasn't really aware that, like, when they said certain terms, I was meaning them a different way. And so we were all using the same words to talk about Jesus and to talk about God and talk about church, but I just meant them in a much more progressive Methodist, Wesleyan, feminist way than these very conservative Baptists, Southern Baptists. And so it was really confusing trying to get on the same amount of terms with these people. And then I went to work for Christianity Today up in Wheaton, and that was so much more freeing because it was a more nuanced view of Christianity and more open. And I mean, they were very evangelical. Don't get me wrong. It's the flagship magazine of evangelicalism, but it is a broader tent. The problem was, of course, that I'm queer. And so, I mean, nobody like pulled the wool over my eyes. Like I wasn't manipulated into, like I fully went in knowing what they believed, but it became one of those situations like when I was in college where I went in knowing that I was mainline and I knew I was not evangelical and I knew I wasn't straight, but I wanted to partner with these people to do something really good because I really believed in what they were doing. And then after a while, God called me away from that. And I am here now in Southern California, and I'm able to be out and I'm able to be a leader within the LGBTQ community here in my local location and then online as well through Queer Christian Twitter.
Nice. That's very cool. That is a story and a half. You've been in a lot of places. So now you said you're queer. How do you identify?
So I use queer as an umbrella term because I am one of the letters on the LGBTQIA, and that A gets left off a lot, or people don't really understand what it means. They'll say it means ally, they'll say it means something else.
No, it doesn't mean ally. Let's just put that right.
Yeah.
Let's put that to rest. LGBTQIA does not mean ally. We are not part of the spectrum.
Yeah, thanks. You know, I have so much respect for, especially in the Christian community, allies have lost a lot. Jen Hatmaker talks a lot about this, about how risky it is for allies to even come out. But even more than that, like that should be a building block to be like, okay, if it's this hard for straight people to come out as allies, how much more hard is it for people like to belong?
Yeah.
So I identify as aromantic, asexual. And what that means is just like how, you know, how like a straight person, like let's say you're a straight man, you're assuming not attracted to other men. In the same way that, you know, a gay woman is not attracted to men. She's a lesbian. She's not attracted to men. I have both of those kind of, that I'm not attracted to men and I'm also not attracted to women. And so that kind of combines. I often explain it as like sexuality is kind of a multiple choice quiz, is that you've got like, it's a little exclusive to pan-romantic people, so please don't like take this as gospel. But, you know, you've got like, are you a woman who's attracted to men? Are you a woman who's attracted to other women? Or you option C, which is both. That's like bi or pan.
Right.
And then you've got like option D, which is none of the above, like on your standard test. Like option A, option B, option C is both A and B, and then option D is neither A nor B, and none of the above. So that's, you know, it's a pretty binary view of gender. So please don't take that as literal. But that's just kind of how I explain what aromanticism and asexuality are. Is just that not experiencing romantic attraction, aromantic, and then not experiencing sexual attraction, which is asexual. And those don't have to overlap. Like people are any degree of those. Some people rarely experience attraction. Some people only experience attraction like after they've formed a deep friendship with somebody.
Isn't that like demisexual?
It is, yeah. And so there's all these different ways to fit into these spectrums that aren't black and white. But I happen to be both. So people can be like biromantic asexual, which means they're romantically attracted to more than one gender, but they're not sexually attracted to them. So that kind of split attraction model is what we call that. And I just happen to be the extremes of everything. I'm celibate, I'm not partnering, like I don't even have, there's this thing called queer platonic relationships, and it's where even if you don't have romantic or sexual attraction to somebody, you still want like marriage or still want a deeply committed marriage-like relationship or dating-like relationship, but it's just platonic. I don't even have that. So like celibate, not partnering, asexual, aromantic, like I got all of it, like, you know. So
well, let me ask you this. You mentioned celibacy. So I'm going to go to the go-to passage about celibacy. I don't know the reference, but it's when Paul's talking about celibacy being a gift. Do you feel that that idea of celibacy being a gift, do you feel that's something that you are embodying in what you experience? Or do you feel that it's something different? Yeah, I mean, just talk to me about that a little bit.
Totally, yeah. Like, I'm very passionate about this, that celibacy is one of the gifts that God gives us, and not everybody has it, just like not everybody has the gift of parenthood. and not
Mhm.
everybody has the gift of marriage. Like, those are all valid gifts. I'm not devaluing any of those gifts.
Right.
But I do think in the church that we have devalued celibacy and singleness in general to the extent that marriage gets put in place as the default. Can you
Mm.
think of like how many sermons you've heard in your life where it was just assumed we all know what it's like? We all know what it's like to be married. We've all had a wedding. We
Right.
all know what it's like to have children. We've all had to clean up goldfish from our minivan, you know? And that's not true, because like even though
Yeah.
like half of the church is single, that's, you know, all the pastors and all the leaders that are speaking from the pulpit are married, and that's even seen as a qualification in some circumstances. They won't even hire
Hmm.
you unless you're a married parent. So that's been a difficult thing, is that we need to elevate the gift of celibacy to the same level that we elevate the gifts of marriage and of parenthood. And now I want to be clear about something. Not every asexual person is celibate. Those
Right.
aren't the same thing. So asexuality is not a choice. It's just something that God gave me. He created me this way. I was born that way. Um, but I could choose to have sex if I wanted to. And
Hmm.
many asexual people do. Some want to be parents. Some want to do it just because it feels good. It's fun. Their partner wants it, and it's a way of expressing love to their partner in a romantic way. So there's a lot of asexual people that do have sex for whatever reason they want to. And
Hmm.
celibacy is kind of a spectrum of, you know, what do you consider celibate? So that, you know,
Right.
there's a big spectrum there. But I really want to emphasize that celibacy can also be a gift to people who are not asexual,
Hmm.
but it should never be a requirement. So the main problem
Right.
that we have right now is that the church hears the word celibacy and they automatically assume, oh, you're a white, cis, gay male, because that's who's talking about celibacy right now. And God bless
Right.
Wesley Hill. He's doing great work. I love Wesley Hill's work on friendship in the church. That's so needed. But I also want to push back on that side B perspective of that you can't force a gift. If someone has not been
Mm.
called to the priesthood, you can't say you were born to be a priest, and therefore, since you're male, automatically being male means you have to be a priest and you have to, you know,
Right.
be a pastor or whatever. And that's just not true. We wouldn't say that. That would be ridiculous. And it's
Yeah.
just equally as ridiculous when we tell straight people, well, you're straight, therefore you're called to marriage. And it's equally ridiculous when we tell people who are same-sex attracted, you must be called to celibacy. You don't have a choice. That's it. That's
Mm-hmm.
your only option, is celibacy or straight marriage. And that's just so narrow and so binary, and really misses out on the breadth and diversity that God has for us. He has such beautiful diversity out there that he has created in the world, from every little wildflower. Like, just think about all the wildflowers that exist in a back alley of somewhere. And
Right.
if he has that much diversity next to a dumpster in a back alley, how much more and how much more beautiful is God's creation for a little lower than the angels, the people that were created in his image, imago Dei. He's going to have so much more beautiful diversity to offer them. And that doesn't just end at race, and that doesn't just end at gender. It has to end, and I mean, it just encompasses every aspect of life, which includes, you know, sexual orientation, and it includes lifestyle things like
Yeah.
celibacy and marriage and parenthood and all these wonderful gifts that God's given us. But we have to value them all equally.
For sure. I like to say that we as humans are multifaceted. And that's the way that God made us. He made us to be multifaceted. We don't just have one face and that's all that we are. And like you've emphasized, there is a lot of spectrum in all of these things of what it means to be celibate, what it means to be asexual, what it means to be aromantic. Excuse me. What it means to be queer, what it means to be straight, what it means to be cis, what it means to be trans. I mean, there's a spectrum in all of this, and a lot of it has to do with self-identification, I believe, as opposed to like the community even telling you what you are. It's like a self-identifying piece of like, no, this is who I am because this is what rings true in my life, or this is what I've chosen. Um, I'm curious. I'm curious about singlehood. I don't know what word to use, but how do you feel that singleness? Okay, let's back up. We have all heard at weddings, in sermons, marriage is the picture of Jesus in the church.
Yeah.
Like the picture. It's not just a picture. It is the picture. It is like the Mona Lisa of Jesus in the church.
Mm-hmm.
So how does singlehood embody that relationship between Jesus and the church?
Oh yeah. Well, Jesus was single.
True.
Jesus was
Very
lifelong
true.
single, and as far as we know, there's no evidence in Scripture whatsoever that he ever experienced romantic attraction. And
Mm-hmm.
there's no experience. There's nothing in Scripture whatsoever that could ever, I mean, even hint that he experienced sexual attraction.
Mm-hmm.
So it's equally valid to think that Jesus may have been a romantic asexual. There's really nothing in Scripture that would contradict that. In fact, there's a lot to support it because we typically as humans do tend to express those things at very young ages when we do have that. But there's no like, yeah, Jesus left his girlfriend to go off and start a ministry, or, you know, like there others,
Right.
Peter had a wife because we know he had a mother-in-law and that sort of thing. So even those hints would be scattered throughout Scripture of, you know, Jesus and his mother-in-law, or Jesus and his wife, or, you know, something. And
Right.
none of those little scroll fragments, whatever, have turned out to be true. So even though people try.
They have. Yes, they
So
have.
I think that, yeah, it's beautiful because Jesus did embody singleness as far as we
Mm.
know. I mean, Paul was even single too. And so the fact that we follow this religion that is entirely led by a single man, and yet we don't value singleness, it just blows my mind. But there's so many kinds of love, like fatherly love that Christ has for us, and like the friendship that the Holy Spirit gives. He calls him the friend. He doesn't call him the ghost. He calls him the friend. And so I
Right.
think there's just so many relationships with the counselor, or like God has so many different names. And so, yeah, you can call Jesus the bridegroom, but that's just one of so many expressions that Jesus has for the church. And then we could also consider ourselves wedded, if you want to use the word wedded, to many other things in life. We could be wedded to serving out God's calling, and that could be a calling towards celibacy. So, you know, the
Mm.
nuns are often said to be married to Christ, that they'll wear wedding
Right.
rings.
Right.
And we've lost that in the Protestant church. Many other cultures, Chinese, you know, there's been other cultures, Native American, that have a picture, like a ceremony of singleness, that like you are recognized that you're self-partnered in that way. And we make fun of that in American culture. If somebody, you know, Emma Watson or whoever comes out and says, actually, I'm single, I'm self-partnered, we're like, oh, that's, you know, these
Right.
millennial
Right.
internet terms of like, you know, this weird generation that has grown up in such a distorted view of what sexual relationships and romantic relationships are supposed to be like. And instead, you know, like we just need to recognize that celibacy is an equal calling with marriage, and that, yeah, Jesus is the bridegroom and he married the church, and that's, marriage is a great picture of that. I'm not discounting that.
Sure.
But that singleness is also that we can be married to other things that are good and equally as good as marriage.
That's really good. The idea of singleness being a lens through which we see other pictures of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
I'd never really thought about that before.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I was always raised kind of, you're going to get married, you're going to have kids. It's sort of the default. And for me, it is the default. I mean, I'm a white hetero cis male. I'm on the Kinsey scale. I'm pretty like white hetero cis. Like that's where I fall on it. You know, like it makes sense that I'm married and I have kids. But yeah. So how do you think singleness and celibacy in the church, or even a queer identity in the church,
Mm-hmm.
how do you think those things can help us embody those alternate views of Christ? I mean, they're biblical. They're not alternate like we're interjecting something to the text. But let's take, for example, when Jesus is brooding over Jerusalem. He says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you know, if you had come to me, I would have covered you like a mother hen. We don't really think about Jesus in those terms, especially in America, because America. But But when we think about things like that, like how can celibacy, singleness, and queerhood, how can these things help us view Jesus through these other facets of who he is?
Yeah, I think it kind of has to start with having a bigger lens than our own. So
Mm,
when that is really comfortable to you to get married and be a parent and that sort of thing, it can tend to kind of feel like that's the way everyone should be. And
mm,
so you'll see
mm.
these girls who get married and they're like, oh, I'm so glad I had the one. And like, I recommend this to everyone. Everyone needs to get married. This is the path. Like, marriage makes you holy and all these kind of sayings.
Right.
Um,
Ugh.
but I think we have to have that big enough picture in our head to be like, this is good for me, but this may not be good for you. This may not be what you are
Mm,
called to. And having that expansiveness to say what you are called to is good. And even if it's not, like, it doesn't have to be good for me. So like affirming that somebody could be, two gay married men in ministry, and that is so good for them. But like, I have no desire to be married to a man, and I have no desire to be gay, and I have no desire to be in ministry. But like, that's good for them, and that's okay.
right.
And I can accept that is their calling, even though that's not the calling on my life.
How do you feel the concept of phileo, of brotherly love, or familial love, I should say? How do you feel that that plays into that concept of like I'm happy for you,
Mhm.
but that's not for me?
Yeah, I think overall in general, we have emphasized eros so much, the romantic love and the sexual love so much that we have lost sight of filios love, we've lost sight of platonic love. And so we need to view the church as family, and then
Mm,
not just like viewing it as family, like as a group of nuclear families of like these parents and their children and these parents and their children, these
right,
parents
right, right.
and these grandparents are related, therefore we're multi-generational. And that's not how it works. Like, the church as family, especially in the early church, came together and said, we belong to each other now. And the queer community is such a pure reflection of that, because that found family aspect had to come about.
Mm,
That
hmm.
had to be a thing because their blood family rejected them. And so when your biological family or your adopted family or whoever you call your parents says, you are no longer my son, you are no longer my daughter because you've come out as queer,
Yeah.
you have to have that found family somewhere. And why not the church? The church is built in as the perfect place to be that. And when they left their families in the early church, like to follow Jesus, that's what they did, is they had these found families of rejecting their mother and father. Jesus even talks about that of,
Right, right.
like, in order to follow me, you're going to have to reject your mother and father. And like, that kind of stuff comes up for us every day, because you never had to worry about what your parents are going to say when you tell them who you really are. I don't
Mm.
know that you've seen that picture of Jesus. So that's a bold thing to say, but like, I know
No,
that.
that just, wow, that just struck me. Like, what would it be for Jesus to quote unquote come out to Mary as like,
The Messiah,
yeah,
like,
like she knew it, like she knew it because you have the Magnificat and everything like that, but I don't think she really knew what it meant. And then to have him sort of say, I'm not a carpenter, I'm the savior.
yeah. And I think Mary knew in a way of like, when moms can see that in their sons and they sign them up for a dance class when all the other cool boys are doing something else, and it's like, you're
Uh,
gonna really love this. And so I don't want to stereotype, but I do
no,
think
no, no,
there's
yeah.
parents there that can be like, oh, okay, like this was what's going on here. Or like, you see, like, there's parents that can understand when their daughter comes to them and says like, mommy, I think I'm a boy, and like, I don't know what that is, and like, I don't understand.
Hmm.
And like, the parents that can kind of help their child, like, let's try gender neutral clothes. Like, let's try that. Like, you want to wear this, I'm fine. Like, if you
Hmm.
want to explore this, like, let's see where we're going here. I'm not going to tell you who to be. And I think that was Mary with the wine. I think Mary with the wine at the wedding was kind of like, yeah, I know who you are, and even if you're not ready to come out yet to the world, I still know because I'm your mom. And that's the kind of parenting that we need for LGBTQ kids is that we need the kind of
Mhm.
mom that's like, I'm here and I support you. Like, if you want to go try out for Broadway instead of the basketball team, I'm here for that. And if you
Yeah.
need a boy, you can like it. It's okay. Do you have a crush on your friend? I'm here for it. And like just having that acceptance and openness already laid down as the foundation,
Mhm.
um, that whoever you are is okay with me, and I will still love you no matter what. That's the parenting that we need in our society, rather than the parenting that says like, boys don't cry, get your tail in line, like,
Right.
oh, I saw you with a boy the other day, like you must, boyfriend, girlfriend, like, and they're 5,
Yeah. Yeah. Let's.
that's the kind of stuff that we need to get rid of. So I think that having that openness to celibacy, having that openness to singleness, to stop telling children like, when you get married, like, there's this whole movement within the church of purity culture. And one
Yeah.
of the facets of purity culture even had 13-year-old girls, like little girls, telling their husband what they were doing. And so they would write down like letters to their future husband. And that was supposed to keep them on track to get married someday instead of just playing around with boyfriends. And
Yeah.
wow, that is horrible. And then like think about it too, is that I have all these friends who do want to be married, and they are not aromantic and they're not asexual, but they have all these letters to this guy that may or may not exist. And they
Yeah.
wore this purity ring forever, and they had this like hope in mind. So I think overall embracing celibacy and singleness and queerness as a possibility for kids
Mhm.
is something that Mary can actually be kind of a figurehead for, and kind of a mentor, an example for us that, your kid may not turn out to be this straight, married carpenter taking up the family business, carrying on the family name. Like, God's got something so much bigger in store for all of our kids, that you may not know, like you may not realize it. But yeah, I do think Jesus had that, and he understood that. And then I also think his followers understood it in ways that we even see today with the persecuted church of like, Mom, Dad, I'm Christian. And it's like, what? Get out of my house. You don't
Mhm.
hear much about that in the US, but those
Yeah.
stories do exist. And
Yeah.
the evangelical church is very good at that, of saying like, can you believe like what a great sacrifice they made for their faith and everything. But then when it comes to their queer kids coming out to them, they're like, we're a Christian house, get out of my house. And so they don't see
Right.
the parallel that when Jesus said this is to tear you apart, like it is like living into who God made you to be is
Mhm.
going to hurt you, and it's going to hurt other people, but you have to embrace that pain, because it's the same pain that Jesus took on. And it's the
Yeah.
same thing that early Christians went through. And so I don't want to like over spiritualize that in a way, but also I want to say that if you're out there and you're hearing this and you feel that rip in your soul, like, know that Jesus empathizes with that, and he is there for you, and he hears you, and he understands that. And it's something that you can bring to him in a safe place.
Oh, that's so good. Yes. I want to talk about found family, because talking about Mary and Jesus leads me to thinking about Mary and John. When Jesus on the cross, he's like, John, here's your mom. Mary, here's your son. Like, gives them to each other, not gives one to the other, but not just gives Mary to John, but like gives them both to each other. And in this found family sense, how do we? Yeah, let me just ask. I mean, I'm straight. I don't get it all. How can I embody found family to LGBTQIA plus people?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first step is getting to know them, because if you don't know people and you're not outside your bubble of all other straight married white people,
Mm-hmm.
then you're not going to meet them. And so I think belonging to an affirming church that is a welcoming place for LGBTQ people is really important.
Mm-hmm.
I really want those people who want to stay in their non-affirming churches and fight for it to become affirming. If that's your calling, go for it. But
Right.
if you are like, I'm staying at this church because it's comfortable for me, but I would never bring my gay friend here or my gay coworker here, that may be a time it's time to leave. It's time to get out. That if you
Yeah.
can't like bring in people who want to know more about God, then that's probably not a safe place for you to be either. So belonging to an affirming church that is that kind of place, and then being open as an ally. I had a friend at a very conservative place that she had a rainbow heart sticker on the back of her phone case. And that was like, oh my gosh, I feel safe with this person. Because when you're queer, you're just looking for anybody that's like, please let somebody be not an enemy of mine. Like if I tell them, they're not going to hate me. And that's the fear that you go into every relationship and every friendship, every mentorship, is just, once these people find out the truth, who's still going to love me, who's still going to want to be with me. And so that's, I mean, it's doubly for asexual and aromantic people, because sometimes we're not accepted by our own community.
Right.
So we kind of have both ends. But I think within the straight cis Christian framework, a lot of that is just signaling that you are a safe person. You know, post pictures of you going to Pride, post pictures of you hanging out with your gay uncle, or, you know, whatever. Like, the more openly accepting you can be, the more safe you're going to find. And you might actually even end up attracting queer friends, but it's like you become known as the safe person. And so you're like, oh, now suddenly I'm everyone's straight uncle ally, you know, sorry, brother or whatever. And so I think signaling that you are a safe place, then when people do get kicked out of their family or don't feel connected to their family, or their family says, it's okay that you are this way, but I don't want to hear about it. Just keep it silent. I don't want to see it. I don't want to talk about it. I think then we can come to the people that we know in our lives that are affirming, and we can go to them and feel safe and feel like we can be part of somebody else's family. Maybe go over there for Father's Day instead if your father rejects you. Or I had a group of friends in Alabama, even before I was out, that I was just single, and I was out as like, I don't want to be married. Like that was kind of the level of that I was. And I wasn't even out to myself. Like I didn't even know what these terms meant. I just knew that I was different than other people, and had to kind of mourn that I wasn't going to have that sense of normalcy as other people. But I had this family that literally just adopted me in and said, hey, you need someone to go for Memorial Day barbecue? We're your Memorial Day barbecue people. You need someone to go for Easter lunch? We're going to have a picnic. Like, come on. And so I think having those minor holiday things, like people think about with Christmas, like, oh, how sad would it be to be alone on Christmas? But a lot of us do go home to our family on Christmas. It's those little things. It's like Mother's Day or whatever. It's like, if your mom didn't, like, maybe she didn't want you or didn't accept you, like having those people that say, hey, like, you're welcome to come and celebrate with us and be with us, and so you don't feel alone. Or, you know, I mean, there's just like 1,000 things. Halloween tends to be really kid-centric. That if you're not really a party person going to clubs or whatever, you're just kind of sitting alone at home on Halloween. So to have somebody with kids be like, hey, want to come help me wrangle the kids? It's like, yeah, let's go. So feeling included as part of a family, and that they don't say, no, you're not part of this. Like there doesn't come a point where you're like, you're not invited into this space with us. You know, because it's really good to be like, oh, we're all church family while we're at the physical location of church.
Right.
And when it's done, everybody goes to eat lunch with their families. And so when you're alone and you don't have a family, that's the loneliest time ever for a single person, is that when you leave church and you know everybody else is going to split off and go with their families or go with their groups of families together, and you don't qualify because you don't meet the qualifications required for entry.
Man. Oh, that's rough.
Yeah. So I think just being mindful of those people in your life and welcoming them in. If you see them in a Sunday school class, if you see them in a small group, reach out to them, because don't assume that people have somebody that, you know, if you have a problem, you're probably going to go to your wife about it and talk to your wife about it. And that's great. But if I have a problem, like, I have to deal with it alone.
Yeah.
So, like, if you know a single person who's moving, be like, hey, do you need help boxing up your crap, or, you know, whatever. Like,
right.
Not making assumptions of all the things that you would normally be like, well, I have my wife help with that, or she would be like, oh, I have a husband, so I don't really need to think about that.
Right,
you know?
right. So let me ask this, and I ask this because Christianity has a real long vein of colonialism. You mentioned like going to Pride and things like that. How do we as an ally not take over and centricize ourselves in those spaces? Like I want to be found family, right? Like I want to be open. I want to be there. I want to be present. But how do I not centricize myself so that it's like the white cis male show with all my sidekicks, you know, like that's not how it should be, but that's how it ends up being a lot. in church spaces unless the church is like specifically queer. Like even in affirming churches, it still is like the pastor is straight and this, and then the worship leader is like non-binary, and a couple of people are like queer and lesbian and stuff like on the team, but like the leadership is still really, I mean, you can get into it with race too. It does the same thing, and or intergenerational, of like it's still like a specific generation that's leading. Grandma and grandpa are just in the pews, so therefore it's intergenerational, and we're attracting the young children as the hope of our future. And that's a whole other conversation. Let's just be honest. But how do we do this without centering ourselves?
Yeah, well, I think the the shortest answer possible is stop talking. And so if you stop talking, other people will have the opportunity to start talking. But I think the longer answer for that of like, what do you do that? Like, what does that actually look like? Is bringing those queer people up on stage. And that's hard in a denomination that requires ordination for the pulpit. But I think you can still have speakers come up that, maybe you're going to have a sermon about, maybe you'll have a sermon about marriage. And then the next week needs to be a sermon preached by a single person about singleness. Or you could have a sermon about being a more inclusive place for belonging, but don't preach it yourself. Invite in a gay pastor, a bi pastor, or a non-binary pastor. Like, having these connections first off of just shaking hands, getting to know one another, like being an affirming person, being a welcoming person. That's how you build that network. And then when you do have a platform, Rachel Held Evans monitored this really well. She modeled it so well that she had this blog, and so she would invite guest people. It wasn't just her writing all the time. Is that she would interview people, she would have them come write, she would say, ask a whatever.
Right, yeah, I remember that series. Yeah.
Yeah, and so she modeled this so well of, even before anybody else was doing it, having a list of people that if somebody called her up and said, hey, can you come speak at our panel? And she'd be like, how diverse is that panel? Who else is speaking? And if it was all white women, she'd say, like, nope, here's my list of other people you're going to call first before you invite me to do this. And so I think that that is a key thing of just one, knowing people. Who do you know already that is not cis, that is not straight? And having those people on a speed dial that you could refer to them, and having links to their work, having them on your Twitter list so that then you can say, like, here's actually voices you should listen to instead who are talking about this from their own experience. So I think that that's the number one thing, is just one, getting to know the people as a safe person. And then two, having them on the top of your mind that you can pull them out and say, you know what, I should shut up. Like, I really shouldn't be talking right now. This person should be talking. And I know that I'm not just going to tokenize them as like, hey, you're a gay person, go talk about gay stuff, but like, I genuinely know somebody who is a spiritual director, who is a therapist, and he's gay. So yeah, he can talk to you about mental health and queerness from a place that like he actually is kind of an expert at that, is what he does. So, that's the kind of thing that I would say the allies can do. Just keep your mind, I need to be quiet now. And then how you implement that is by having a wide network of the people that given the mic.
What's the role? I am still thinking of this in terms of like embodying shared family, like found family, right? Yeah. Like I'm thinking of this in terms of like how we actually live this out. So what's the role of an ally in defending those people that they have adopted? Like you said like the first thing, like in centering ourselves is to shut up.
Yeah.
But what do we do to defend them? Is that when we speak up? Is that when we pass the mic? Is that like, I know there's not like one answer to that because it's all very situational. Yeah. But how do we embody found family when it comes to like toxic relationships, things like that?
Yeah, I think that's really important to remember. We are exhausted because we queer people have to do this every damn day. But it's like, we post a picture of like, hey, it's a beautiful day at church, and like, here's us with our church family. And somebody gets on there and it's like, how dare you call yourself a Christian? And like, rah, 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 you're going to hell. And so I think that's the place where allies can step up and say like, hey, no, I'm going to take on this burden, and I'm going to say, yeah, you can be Christian at my church, and you can be, you're welcome here. You're allowed to be here. And that means so much to us to step in and, kind of have that support, knowing that if we are putting ourselves out there and being vulnerable and we get attacked, somebody else is going to have our backs. Like an older brother that's just going to come in and say, we don't do that here. That's not the game we play in this house. And that applies in real life gatherings as well, is that if you've invited your gay friend over for Thanksgiving because he's not welcome at his own home, and then you have a homophobic relative that comes over, who's giving my care in that situation, is you have to be able to step up to that homophobic relative and say, we're not playing games here today. You're going to keep your mouth shut. We're going to welcome this person and love them as Jesus loves them. And I don't care what you think about it. I don't care what your opinion is on their lifestyle or relationships. And that's the kind of allyship that we need, is just being that defense, being that shield. Not that we're defenseless, obviously, but just that we have to do it ourselves all of the time. And so we're really done. We're really sick of it. And I think that can apply for race as well, is that, you listen, you do your homework, you know about what really people are actually saying, and not taking on the white activist thing. Because I've seen that so much, or the straight activist thing. It's like people think that they're doing a really good job of defending you because they've picked up on one like hot button line that they've heard over and over. Yeah. And it's like, that's not not relevant here, or two, that's not what that means. That's actually like not a good representation of who we are. So I think that,
please stop. Don't do that anymore. That's not us. Right. Yeah, I've been told that a couple of times, and I've had to swallow the pride and be like, you know what? Okay. I understand that, because in found families, which I understand found families because I had to find my own family in a lot of ways. So like in a found family, you don't pick up on headlines and news stories. You pick up on who the person is. And it's not that they just happen to be queer. It's not like that, because it's an identity piece. But you pick up on who they are, and you don't defend a topic or a position. You defend the person. That's what I've noticed. I mean, how does that feel to you as someone like even in a queer community? If I was to step up and say, no, asexuality is valid, aromanticism is valid, for people that are like, no, it's not really, they're just haven't found the right person, or are confused, or are really repressed, or whatever the case might be, for me to step up and say that, is that defending you as a person? Or what's the best way to actually step in and defend you as a person without bringing more like fire towards you? You know what I mean?
Oh, it's so highly contextual. But yeah, I would say having the silencing effect on other people. So like if you're in a physical room of people, like I'm not talking on Twitter or something where you don't know these people, but right. Like if you're in a physical room of people and they're like talking about somebody either behind their back, or maybe like in conversation that somebody's trying to say, hey, I'm asexual, here's what this means, and somebody's like, yeah, whatever, like you're 25, call me when you're older, or that sort of thing. Because we get a lot of that. It's like, oh, you're just young. It's like, okay, well, I'm 50 and I'm still here and I'm asexual still. So what are you gonna do now? And then they turn it on you, and it's like, oh, you're sad and you're repressed, or whatever. Like, oh, you're secretly gay. Oh, you're really straight and you just want to be special snowflake and all these things. And to just say, I believe you, to stand up and say like, no, I believe this person and I trust them, that their experience is what they say it is.
Your experience is what it says it is. Not just that your experience is valid, but that your experience is what you say it is.
Yeah, because here's the thing, is that we are told, queer people are told, especially aromantic asexual people, are told that we are not a reliable source of our own identity, and that other people have to tell us what our identity is because we're confused, or we don't understand, or we're not old enough, or we're too old, or whatever. And so having that affirmation from an ally there that says, I trust you and I believe you when you say that this is your experience and when you say that this is your identity. And I may not understand all of it, but I'm here and I'm listening and I want to learn more.
Wow. I never thought about that. That hurts my heart that people wouldn't trust you with your own identity. Damn, that is some heavy shit. That just is.
Yeah. And you just never know in what conversation it's going to come out. You know, you can be talking on Twitter, you can be at work, you can be anywhere that it comes up. And as soon as you put those words out there of actually I'm queer, actually I'm gay, actually I'm asexual, actually I'm bi, then as soon as that happens, like every time you do it, there's always the possibility you're going to be rejected by somebody you know and love. Every time.
That just hurts me. Mm-hmm. I mean, I can't imagine going through that. Yeah. I mean, do you experience that as somebody who's single as well?
Sometimes I can usually get away, and I have for a very long time. In fact, I did to myself for a long time. I didn't know. With just being like, I'm a really feminist woman and I'm really professional and I move a lot and I'm blah, blah, blah. I don't have time for a boyfriend. I'm more focused on my career right now. You could do all those things. Like there's definitely ways you could do that. You know, just like the lesbian gal pals. I'm like, oh, she's my roommate, you know?
Right.
There's only so long you can do that without feeling like you're being inauthentic to yourself. Because to some degree that's true, that I am single because I want to be. I'm not single because I'm asexual. I'm single because I want to be single.
Right.
So there's some degree of that, but then also like it's just not true. That it's not true that I'm, you know, gonna wait for a guy. And so I had a lot of these church ladies that would tell me, "Oh, that's right, honey. As soon as you stop looking for a man, that's when you find Mr. Right. He's coming. God's gonna provide." Like, you know, all these things. And it's like, you're not listening. That I have to tell you I'm asexual for you to believe me that I don't want to be married. And so it's almost like an authenticity and then a legitimacy of like, I don't know how to explain it to you in any other terms, but I'm not straight. I'm not going to find a man. And like, honey, it's just not going to happen. I am not attracted to men. Like, and so once you put it in terms of like, I am not attracted to men, like that, I think that is like a whole different paradigm that people enter. Like, oh, you're not just commitment phobic. You're not just a repressed millennial that's Peter Pan syndrome.
Right.
You know, like all these things that they try to put on us of like, oh, you just need to try internet dating. You just need to try harder. Or you just, oh, don't try harder. And God's going to bring the right person when you stop trying. And like, you know, oh, I'm so sorry for you. And it's like, don't feel sorry for me. Don't mourn with me because I'm not mourning.
Yeah. Okay. So this is my pet peeve question that I love asking everybody. In light of everything we've talked about, found family, self-identification, in light of talking about how to be an ally, in light of talking about all of this stuff, what does this do to the gospel for you?
Oh, it's so beautiful. God created you exactly as you are, and he loves it. He calls it good. Christianity isn't just about an MLM scheme, you know, like the marketing schemes where it's like, if you invited more people and then they invited more people and then we can all have, you know, then we'll all be rich.
Oh, gosh.
There's that scheme of you invite in the children. And if you can get the children to come to church, their parents will come. And you get their parents to come, and then more parents will come. And it's just this like MLM scheme of trying to get church growth and money. And you can't ignore that is always a concern, is that money. The more members you have, the more children that grow up in the church, the more loyal they'll feel to it and they'll stay connected and you'll have more money. And so that's all part of that whole scheme. And asexual people, like God created us and said, no, I love you. just the way you are. I don't want you for your potential to reproduce. I don't need you for your potential to be a relationship that mirrors the Christ in the church and have a wedding and all these things like that. You know, God says, I just want you for you, like who you are, and not for your potential, not for anything you can earn or bring to the table. I just love you, and you are inherently worthy. And then also we model that relationship of found family, that if you're not concerned necessarily with attracting a mate for romantic purposes or sexual purposes, then you're concerned about attracting family and about serving the least of these and about, you know, attracting the people who no one else is attracted to. And so bringing that all together, we are such a beautiful reflection of God's diversity, because we're just here. We don't have any reproductive or whatever. I mean, asexual people have children. Don't get me wrong. There's
Yeah.
this is not all the same thing. But just being created without romantic attraction, without sexual attraction, is like, sex isn't what makes you human. And I know this is kind of jumping again, that you're a podcast about humanity and what makes us human. But that's the main thing that I would have to say, is that God created us human, and that includes a lack of sexual attraction, and that includes a lack of romantic attraction.
And even with like sexual and romantic attraction, that's not what you're good for.
There you are. You just landed it. So that's the nail, is that people always say, you have to, like, asexual people aren't real because sex is what makes us human. And even in the Supreme Court decision to allow same-sex marriage, what was written in there was that all humans have romantic attraction and should be allowed to marry their person they're attracted to, because marriage is a requirement. It is a right that, you know, everybody has. And while of course I believe that same-sex people should be allowed to get married, of course, that's not in question. What I am questioning is that we have written it into our law that is inherent in human beings, that we have romantic attraction in order to be human, that romance, that sex is what makes us human. And I would say, like, that's just so messed up, that that's such a small-minded picture of what humanity is that humans don't just exist to have romantic and sexual relationships with each other. There's so much more love that we were created. You know, yeah, I'm okay with saying humans were created for love, that God created out of love, of course. But that love can mean so much more than romance, and that love means so much more than sex.
God, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Oh, well, Jenna, thank you so much. This has been fantastic. I have you have helped me see things and feel things that I didn't before, and I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aaron.
Yeah. Well, let me tell people where to find you, because you are worth following on the Twitters. You are at Jenna_DeWitt, and your website is Invisible Cake Society. Is it .com? Is that right?
.wordpress.com. Yeah, just a WordPress blog. So.
Oh, .wordpress.com.
Yeah, we're kicking it old school out here in the blog world, bringing back the blogs.
Yes. Gotta love blogs. Gotta love them. Well, thank you so much. I will put all your information in the show notes as well, so people can click and find you. You've been an absolute delight. I would love to have you back on sometime. How does that sound?
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks so much.
All right. Well, thank you. You have a great rest of your day, okay?
Bye.
All right. Bye.